What's Oregon's record going to be this year? Well, first off, here's what you need to know. Over-under win total, 10.5, really high. They've got the second best odds at FanDuel to win the Big Ten. They've got the third best odds to win the whole thing, to win the college football playoff. They are recruiting like they never have before. Just signed the number 3 class in the country, brought home, I think, the number 2 portal class in the country. So they are acquiring talent at a level they never have before. And they've done it good in the past, but never quite like this. So I think I know Tez Johnson, Evan Stewart at wide receiver. That's about as good a 1-2 as you're going to get at wide receiver in the country. Now, Evan Stewart's still got to do it, but the talent is there. I think the scheme is there. I'm going to talk more about the coordinator in a second. I think I know they're more than ready for the Big Ten style of play. I'll go a step further. I think they're ready to raise the Big Ten caliber of play up front. Now, that's a lot to say, but I do believe they can match and exceed the physicality that is required to survive a season in the Big Ten. I think I know Josh Connerly and Johnny Cornelius. That makes up a top 5 offensive tackle duo in the country. Blake Brockermeyer does a lot of good work for us. He put out his top 10 offensive lines the other day, got Oregon at number 9. And I'm looking ahead of them. And Jesse, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't see any other Big Ten teams there. So does Oregon enter the Big Ten with the best offensive line in the conference? People are saying yes. Here's what I want to know about Oregon. Is that pass defense going to step up? Because it hurt them against Washington last year twice. They need transfers to pan out in that secondary. If they do that, they'll be okay. If they don't, then you got some track meets, and maybe not up and down the list of Big Ten teams they play. But eventually you're going to run into a team that can throw the ball on you. And if it's the playoffs, it's the playoff. If it's week 6, it's week 6. So that's the first thing. The second thing is on the other side of the ball, Dylan Gabriel. So they get him at quarterback. It's a big-time transfer. Gabriel's going to be right up there with some of the best odds to win the Heisman. Are they going to get top 10 quarterback play from him or top 3? Because that could be the difference in winning a title versus having another really good year, but the big one escaping you, which leads me to my other question. Is there a signature win on the schedule? Colin, I'm going to ask you to do something I normally don't ask you to do. I want you to throw up their schedule because we're just going to go ahead and actually talk about schedule now. I'll talk about the staff in a second. Look up and down this list. If you're listening on podcast, you know which games would be the signature wins. Like Dan Lanning last year had 2 shots at Washington. They didn't get it done. So he had a really good year, but folks looked and said he lost the big one. He couldn't win the big one. Okay. Well, this year, they got Ohio State at home, October 12th. They go to Michigan November 2nd. Depending on what Michigan is this year, that one may qualify. And then maybe a Big Ten championship game. Maybe you're in the playoff. They got the players. Do they win the big one? Or look at the schedule again now. Could it be that they lose to Ohio State, they go beat Michigan, but maybe Michigan's like an 8-4 team this year, and then they lose again to Ohio State in Indy. So it's like last year's Washington problem. They get 2 shots at the Buckeyes, they go 0-2, and otherwise you don't think they really beat a top 10 team. They could be 11-2, and folks are still yelling at Dan Lanning, you hadn't won a big game, you hadn't won the big one. So those are the questions I have. Now, the game of the year is October 12th. That right there, Big Ten game of the year, maybe college football game of the year. They get an extra day's rest on Ohio State because that Michigan State game's a Friday night for them. Also, what's the effect of going to Michigan and to Wisconsin in a 3-week stretch late in the year? Let's keep an eye on that. But if they can get to the Big Ten championship game, pay attention to this. If they can get there, look at the very end of their schedule. They go to Wisconsin. There's a bye week. They get Washington at home, and then they would go to Indy. They got a really late bye. They got 2 byes. Everyone's got 2 byes this year. They got a bye week, the second to last week of the season. They get Washington at home, and then they go to Indy. If they play Penn State or Ohio State in the Big Ten title game, both of those teams will have played like 6 games in a row. Ohio State would be coming off the Michigan game. So if Oregon can get there, there's a pretty significant bye advantage that they would have. The best case with Oregon's 12-0 this year. Their best case record, absolutely 12-0. There's a chance they end up being favored in every game they play this year. So they could be 12-0. The worst case, I've got them going 9-3. I tinkered with the idea of Oregon going 12-0 as my prediction, but I'm going to have them go 11-1. JP Poll's got them rated number 3 in the preseason. I've got them going 11-1, but really I've got them going like 11.5 and 0.5 because I very nearly went 12-0 on them. Oh, yeah, you know what, Jesse? Good point. I skipped the entire staff piece. So I already gave you the prediction there. A couple of things I wanted to tell you as we have every one of these coaches graded in our internal model here. Don't have a grade for Dan Lanning because we want at least 3 years under your belt before we start to grade you. However, for the purposes of this segment, I can plug him in. So, like, if I were to plug what we currently have on Dan Lanning, the head coach, into the model, he would kind of slot himself between like Mike Elko and Rhett Lashley in terms of a grade. It's not apples to apples because those guys have been around. Well, Elko maybe not so much, but like the point is it's early. So we want intentionally a little more resume before we start to grade. Will Stein's the same at offensive coordinator. Will Stein, though, along with Colin Klein down at A&M, a couple of the best offensive coordinators, younger offensive coordinators in the country. This is a top 25 support staff at Oregon. If you wanted to point out a weakness, inexperience could be called a weakness. It's a question mark more so than a weakness. And defensive support staff. They're probably a notch below some of the other big boy title contenders when it comes to grading defensive support staff. So there you go. Oregon, 11-1 this year. Number 3 in the country, preseason JP poll. Does it sound right? Hopefully it does.